55. Ownership. Chalcedon Position Paper, number 120, April 1990. According to Scripture, all property belongs to God, the earth, its peoples, and all their possessions. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. Psalm 24, verse 1. God declares, "All the earth is mine." Exodus chapter 19, verse 5, compare Psalm 49, verses 10 to 12, and verse 17. I am God, for every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. Psalm 50, verse 7 and verse 10. Such statements are repeated in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 26 and verse 28, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 18. God in particular specifies the land and its gold and silver as his. Haggai chapter 2, verse 8. Because God gives man the duty to subdue the earth and to exercise dominion over it, Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, man has God's permission to use the earth as a steward under him. No man nor nation has an absolute and perpetual right to anything, however. As the U.S. courts declared, the idea of absolute property forever in any particular owner is a fiction. There can be no such thing as absolute property forever in the true sense of the term. Harvard Law Review, Volume 11, 1897, page 69. In trying to understand the biblical meaning of stewardship, ownership, we have some gaps in our knowledge, and also some specific data. The conquest of Canaan had apparently several aspects. First, not all of Canaan was conquered at once. Some pagan enclaves remained, to be conquered later, or to merge with Israel by conversion. Some texts, like Psalm 87, celebrate the conversion of aliens to Israel. Second, at the conquest, the land was divided among the tribes or clans and their families. It was a division of land in terms of covenant membership. Third, the land was covenant ground. Therefore, the land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine, for ye are strangers and sojourners with me. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 23. Urban properties could be sold, but rural lands could only be leased out until the next Jubilee year. The rural population was thus a conservative element with roots in the place, as witness the case of Naboth, 1 Kings chapter 21. Land ownership was a covenant fact. It required covenant membership. Aliens to the covenant could lease land, but they could not own it. Thus, the stewardship, ownership of property was a covenant privilege. It did not require blood relationship, but faith and covenant membership. The people were to be a religious unity in covenant with the Lord. The covenant land could not be alienated. In Deuteronomy chapter 28, we have a powerful statement of covenantal status. For faithfulness to the Lord, the people and the lands would be pursued by inescapable blessings in every sphere of their lives. As a people holy unto the Lord, they would be eminent among the nations and feared. They would be lenders, not borrowers. The head and not the tail, and God's blessing would be poured out upon them. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 1 to 14. If unfaithful, they would be accursed by God. The weather and the earth would confound them. They would face captivity and the loss of their land, and every kind of evil would overcome them. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 15 to 68. By God's law, the covenant people were and are strictly barred from being unjust to any alien. Exodus chapter 22, verse 21, chapter 23, verse 9, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 33, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 16, chapter 10, verse 18, chapter 23, verse 7, chapter 24, verse 14, Malachi chapter 3, verse 5, etc. The alien, however, could not be a member of the community apart from covenant faith, and if from certain national groups of very degenerate cultures, this would mean that a record of covenant membership of 3 or 10 generations was in certain cases required. The alien had a specifically protected status, but so too did the covenant land. This means that land possession as a covenant stewardship is placed by God's law not on a racial or nationalistic basis, but on a faith and covenant basis. Israel, after all, was very much a mixed multitude when it left Egypt, with many foreigners in its midst who had become covenant members. Exodus chapter 12, verse 38. Long before that, Abraham had fought a battle with 318 men born in his house, but not of his blood. Genesis chapter 14, verse 14. When Jacob's family moved from Egypt, they numbered 70 blood kin and their wives. Genesis chapter 46, verse 27. But with all those born of Abraham's men, who were not of his blood, they were so numerous that a land of Goshen was given to them. Genesis chapter 47, verse 27. Israel was thus a people in a covenant of faith, not of blood. Land possession was not a matter of blood membership, but of faith and covenant membership. When they forsook the Lord and his covenant, God the Lord dispossessed them. All of this is relevant to our time. The newspapers are full of articles about the increasing foreign ownerships of American properties, and magazine articles regularly supply us with data on the subject. At one time, some states restricted land ownership to certain groups. These laws were nullified after World War II. Historically, such laws have been found again and again in history. It is important, however, to recognize the difference between such laws and biblical law. The non-biblical laws have made a difference in terms of nationality or race. The modern concept is a sterile one because it, quote-unquote, protects a particular national or racial group. There is no stipulation of faith or character. What advantage is there in being protected as an American if the word American is inclusive of men of evil character, perverts, hoodlums, and so on? Racial and nationalistic groupings are not moral divisions. In Amos chapter 5, verse 19, we have a particularly vivid and dramatic picture of false security. It is as if a man did flee from a lion and a bear met him, or went into the house and leaned his hand on the wall and a serpent bit him. Serpents in the house are commonplace now that we have placed citizenship on a non-moral basis. We cannot and must not change the matter by new laws on property and its possession, because such laws are unrelated to moral facts. We are not a covenant people, and laws passed by Congress cannot make us moral or covenantal. We are not interested in converting the alien, but in clobbering him. In fact, too many American church people are not even interested enough in the conversion of their children to put them into Christian schools. If they object to foreigners buying up America, it is because they want our kind to own it, and Our kind has gotten us into our present griefs and disasters. Too often the church itself has a false concept of membership. The first and basic step towards a biblical doctrine of ownership is to recognize that the earth is the Lord's, not ours, nor is it the property of our kind. History is a process whereby God disinherits one group to test another, and the whole world is now in a time of testing and judgment. Second, not only is the earth the Lord's, but also all they that dwell therein. That means us. We are God's property, and He can and will do with us whatsoever He pleases. All of us are full of ideas as to what God should do to everyone else in the way of judgment, all the while expecting Him to bless us. We need to think God's thoughts after Him concerning ourselves and everything else. Third, we must recognize the God-centered and covenantal basis of all ownership. What God gives to us, whether possessions or talents, is in terms of His ownership and purpose, not for our personal benefits. Our stewardship of all property includes our stewardship of ourselves, and we are accountable to Him for all that we are and have. Whether we like it or not, we shall be required to give an accounting. Fourth, we must restore the covenantal basis of all life, and we must recognize that the covenant is a law covenant given to us as an act of grace for our benefit and welfare. God's requirements of us are not intended to punish or deprive us, but to bless us. We are too often poor stewards of property, but God is not, and His chastenings have as their purpose the recalling of men and nations to His way. We are His property and possession. His plan for us is better than anything we can imagine. We must bring ourselves and the aliens in our midst, and then our countries, into His covenantal grace, mercy, and peace. Fifth, Scripture is very clear about the alien within the country. He must be treated the same way as a covenant man, even if an unbeliever. As a believer, he is free to intermarry with covenant families. The alien outside the covenant country has no property rights within the land. Ownership is a form of responsibility, and responsibility within the covenant land is to the covenant God. No unbeliever can exercise such responsibility. Hence, he cannot buy into the land. The first fruits of the earth and the tithes on agricultural and commercial increase belong to the Lord. Today, we see the increase in terms of taxes to the states and of profit to the owner. God and His covenant are divorced from ownership, and our responsibility to God is seen as a private option. For many people, to give or not to God is their decision, not God's law. Having separated God from the ownership of the earth, God is separating men from control of the land and of the city.